Hey, welcome back to Common Mansplaining. Eddie here. Guys, I wanted to share with you a montage that I put together of Jordan Peterson, some of his most genius moments and myself reacting. For those of you out there that aren't a fan of Jordan Peterson, let me just let you know that this guy is next level. I mean, I get that in today's world, the temptation is for geniuses like Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, Jordan Peterson, people like that. If they don't agree with you, the temptation is just to treat them as though they are just worthless. Like they just cannot think logically or rationally because they don't come to the same conclusions that you do. But nothing could be further from the truth, guys. And I have plenty of minds on the left that I truly revere. Just because they come to the wrong conclusion sometimes doesn't make me unable to truly appreciate how intelligent they are and how fast their mind's working and where their mind goes. People like, David Pakman, Destiny, there's just lightning sharp guys. But I mean, just because they don't have the same ideology as me doesn't mean that I can't believe that they are intelligent, that they have some very, very key and insightful points. So I'd love for you to watch this with me and see the kind of genius that Jordan Peterson brings to bear.
Because you can use your language to manipulate, and you can use your language for your own, say, hedonistic purposes or to gain power. Or you can just say what you think. All of those different choices are a decision. That's a wrestling. That's a moral decision. And it shines in every word.
Well,
and so it's super important. That's part of the reason why in the Christian canon, the word is the basis of reality, right? It's the force it's the process that generates the order that's good out of possibility and chaos. Right. And so and Israel, the word Israel means we who wrestle with God. Yep. So that's the chosen people. Right. And so what that means at a deeper level even is that if you're genuinely wrestling with your conscience, then you're someone who's chosen by God. And I think that's right.
That right there, just that alone, it should be enough to show you how deep Jordan Peterson is. I mean, the kind of levels of abstraction that he can frame into something as ancient as the Bible, right? And the fact that it's funny because people say things like, do you believe in God? Is the God of the Bible real? And at some fundamental level, every aspect of it is true. At some fundamental level, maybe not the pure materialistic level that you're thinking about, but at the level where you wrestle with your conscience, sure, we all do that. Even those of us who claim not to have a moral framework, you still wrestle with it. Even if you are struggling to figure out where that moral conscience fits into the rest of the world, you haven't figured it out yet, you still wrestle with it. Let me show you something else.
Because attention is what teaches intellect. So if you pay very, very careful attention to what you say without bringing the automatic assumption that what you say is you to bear on the conversation, and then also to feel like you have to defend it once you say it, you'll find very rapidly that very much of what you think and say has absolutely nothing to do with you.
Yes.
It's the dead souls that are in that little scene that I described to you, sort of manifesting themselves in your head. They're dead ideas that other people have created, and some of them might be applicable to you. You might have the right to them, so to speak, but lots of them won't. And you're using the words as camouflage or self-defense or as an attempt to attain status in a status hierarchy or to make yourself look smarter than you are, or there's all sorts of reasons, or to hide what you think from other people. I see this in undergraduate essays all the time. So, because the essays are full of cliches. And, it's not all that obvious why a cliche is a bad thing, but a cliche is a bad thing in the same way that being possessed by the dead is a bad thing. It's like a cliche isn't you. Yep. It's something else. It's like the crowd. It's like the other. It's not living. It has nothing to do with you. And part of the reason that students use cliches is because it's easier than using your own genuine creative formulation. So you can just default to cliche use, but there's something more insidious than that, is that if you write an essay that's nothing but a string of cliches and you get criticized, then you're not being criticized.
There it is again. Jordan Peterson, just brilliant, right? So one of the things that I've talked about on this channel a lot is that people have this tendency to to get really wrapped up in their own arguments. And a lot of times, those arguments aren't even theirs, right? It's an argument that they heard from a parent, from a pastor, from a school professor or something like that. And they've learned to ingrain it so deeply and make it part of their core identity. This is why one of the reasons that identity politics is so dangerous is because it tricks the mind into attaching itself to the idea so much so that if the idea is attacked, the person feels attacked, the identity feels attacked. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with our society today is that attachment to idea, so much so, even though it's not our idea. And that only leads to less conversation because of the fear of damaging the identity, because of the fear that it's attached to the question, to the idea.
So in the Sermon on the Mount, for example, which is an instruction manual, Christ tells his listeners how to orient themselves in the world properly. So he says, first, aim with all your heart at the highest good you can imagine. Now, you'll get better at that as your vision clears, but that's the orientation, to do what's right. Now, you might say, like Pontius Pilate said, well, what is right? What is truth? But most people know the difference between right and wrong. You know, at least step by step, what would move you forward and upward.
Most of us.
So you orient yourself to the highest possible upward place. Then you make the assumption that other people have the same intrinsic value that you do. So that's your initial aim and presumption. And then you pay attention to the moment. And that's often the statement that gets Christ confused with the hippies, to consider the lilies of the field who don't toil or spin. But that's not the instruction. The instruction is to aim up with everything. And then, having that firmly in mind, to pay attention, as much attention as you can to each moment, to allow the words to come to you that best suit that upward aim, not to subordinate your language to your own machinations or manipulations or your own hedonistic desire, but towards what's right. And if you do that, then what emerges out of possibility is akin to the garden, to the original garden in Genesis 1.
Like pure creation. That's the logos, right? He's pointing out once again this deeper level, this deeper foundational element of the Bible. If you're oriented where you're always aiming toward the highest moral value, what Jordan Peterson refers to as God, right? And whether or not that's the God of the Bible or not, it really isn't important because they serve the same purpose. I think personally, God is a very misunderstood person. I think the people that consider him to be some kind of superstitious sky daddy, it's just way off base. So impossibly wrong that you can't even get into how reductionist that is. So if you're oriented toward the highest moral value, right, and you focus on the present to make sure that you're paying as much possible attention to the present as you can while knowing that you're pointed in the right direction. And that's an instruction manual that's embedded in the narratives in the Bible, and it's embedded in the narratives of most of Christianity.
So I was thinking the other day about numbers. There are mathematicians who think that there isn't anything more real than numbers. And that's an interesting proposition. I mean, it's obviously the case that once you invent or discover numbers, that confers on you a tremendous power. And who knows the limits of that power? And the claim that numbers are more real than anything else is predicated in part on the fact that when you discover them or invent them and start to utilize them, that your ability to operate in the world expands immensely.
By the way, guys, if you are enjoying the content, please share this with your friends. Please like, share, and subscribe, and please give me a hand getting this channel off the ground. I'm fighting this YouTube algorithm with every breath in my body, and it is not easy. YouTube is winning at the moment, so I need all the help I can get. Please give me a hand, and let's get back to Jordan Peterson.
And so that's one of the ways of judging whether or not something is real, is whether or not when you use it, it facilitates your means of operating in the world. Interestingly, numbers are abstractions. And so that raises another question, which is, well, what's more real? The thing that's being abstracted from, or the abstractions? And again, that's not obvious. And maybe the question of more real isn't germane. Maybe it's a question of equal reality, but it's not obvious that abstractions aren't real. And you can make a damn strong case that they're more real than anything else.
Darn right. Sheer genius, right? See, like, this is one of the other things that's attacked in Christianity all the time, is that much of Christianity is symbolic, metaphorical, abstract, right? And yet people will say, well, is that real? My question to you would be, what makes it any less real than any of the things that they're abstracting from? Sometimes it's more real, right? Sometimes just the fact that something gives you that kind of additional utility in the world, far more utility than something really, really concrete, materialistic. Sometimes that is the reality. Sometimes that's precisely what makes it real. And for that matter, we go down to our core fundamental substance, basic bare bones of the galaxy. You can't say that it's molecules and cells, right? Because there's stuff that's smaller than that. You can't say that it's atoms, because there's stuff that's smaller than that. You can't say that it's quarks, really, because now even those are getting broken down into what is now essentially, its information is the fundamental context of the universe. Now, information is always essentially an abstraction. By reference, that makes everything else that we build up into the materialistic world today abstractions of abstractions, right? Like an atom essentially is just a representation of something that we interact with. It's not actually like a little ball, right, that's created by these shells of electrons. No, we may look at it and see that in a science textbook, but that's not what we're actually interacting with. What we're interacting with is far more complex, far more dubious, has all these, like, weak and strong nuclear forces, angular momentum, and all that junk, and far above my head, right, way above my physics acumen. And yet, even I know that that wall over there is a representation. It's an abstraction of what I've learned I tend to interact with. And so, of course, the abstraction of the materialistic universe is probably nothing more than a representation of what we best think the utility of the universe has to us. And as such, I mean, that makes it nothing more than like this utilitarian overlay in our brain. So I don't know, how do you claim what's real and what isn't real at that point? Is it only the mind? Is it the mind plus the fundamental information? Is it the mind plus the fundamental information, what that information does in utility? Is it only the utility? Is it the utility plus the mind? All of these combinations are just as valid. Let's take a look at another one.
Well, Freud would say often that repression occurs unconsciously, but I really wonder about that. I think that what happens is that something happened, or you did something that you don't like, and it's bothering you, and you could think it through, but you just decide not to. You just don't think it through. So it's left vague and uncertain and, it's fairly emotionally salient, but you just refuse to think it through. And you practice doing that until you've built up a habit of not thinking that through. And then you forget that you've built up the habit, and then it's like it's being repressed unconsciously.
Yep.
But I think that or at least you knew when you first did it. And so, when you meet people who are acting in a twisted and peculiar way, and you ask yourself, they're very manipulative, say, you ask yourself, well, do they know what they're doing? The answer to that could be, well, no. But another answer could be, yeah, but they knew once. They knew when they made the decision to start acting like that. But after they did it 100 times or so and made it into an automatic routine, well, then they forgot its origin, and now it runs autonomously. And so now they don't know.
One thing I hear in today's society all the time, especially from the left, is how we're basically all slaves to the past, right? We don't have this active knowledge that we can apply to the universe and make these decisions. We're really just like following computerized, algorithmic models that have determined our actions throughout time. And so, anytime somebody has an issue in society, like, for example, they're not successful, or they're performing antisocial behavior like criminal activity or something like that. And we say, well, is there really no other alternative for them? Could they not have escaped this reality? And of course, from the left I hear, oh, no, it's their environment produced it. But I have to say, there's definitely at least one other facet, and that is how they interact with their environment at each and every stage, right? No matter how much somebody has suppressed what habits they've acquired over a long history of being subject to those environments, they still have the opportunity. Everybody had the choice to not repress it at one point in time. This is one of those things that I hear all the time, like, for example, someone will, like myself, grow up in a really, really, really poor neighborhood with a lot of crime. And I did grow up in a very, very poor neighborhood with a lot of crime. And then later, when they're older, they commit crimes themselves and don't finish school, and then, end up in the drug dealing business. And then, of course, somebody asks, well, wasn't there an escape outlet somewhere? I can promise you there was. I can promise you at no fewer times than like hundreds and thousands of isolated events was I shown a better way. Now, I grabbed a hold of those options. And I'm not saying that there weren't people that had it that didn't have it worse than me. Of course there were. But even those people still had escape hatches at some point. They had escape hatches at some point that they could have grabbed a hold of. They were shown by guidance counselors or by teachers or by friends or by family. Somebody showed them a better way at some point. Now, that doesn't mean that was the primary influence in their life, but it could have been had they selected that person or that thing as the primary influence. I remember growing up in a really poor location when I was really young. By the time I was in high school, I was older. My family was doing a little bit better by then. We were probably in the lower to maybe bottom rung of the middle class echelon of social status. And yet I was still going to school with a lot of, people who were broke, who grew up in places just like me, or still in places just like I grew up in. And, these are people who, out of all of the people in the universe, would have had the excuses, right? They grew up in the wrong environment, to single parenthood in a really poor area of town with high crime. And yet, every single one of those people in my high school had access to a local Army recruiter that they could have taken advantage of. Now, whether or not they did, it's up to them. But they had it. It was there. Now, maybe nobody else showed them to join the Army. Maybe that was the only influence that showed them that it was possible. But that person was there. Definitely did show them that it was possible and that there was another way, right? They didn't have to be antisocial. They could have done that. Now, I'm not saying that they all ended up antisocial. Some of them turned out to have great lives, right? And that's the proof, right? We were all essentially presented with roughly the same opportunities, roughly, right? Maybe some variance here and there, and some people really did have it worse than others, but we're all presented with essentially the same opportunities, and all it takes is one big opportunity to latch onto, even if it's not something that you're used to, even if it's not something that's constantly in your face as you're growing up, it's still there. So in order for someone to tell me that we're a complete computer, mindless, and like an automaton that's just living out our deterministic algorithm, they would have to show me that there were no influences. They'd have to show me that there are none. Because even if there is just one good influence to latch onto, then there is still personal responsibility. Personal choice definitely comes into play.
Parody the traditional conceptions of God, a superstitious being, nothing more than a defense against death, anxiety, or the opiate of the masses, the old man in the sky. The conceptualization of God in the Old Testament and the New Testament is unbelievably sophisticated. And to reduce it to that kind of parody is a stunning disservice.
Yep. There it is again, guys. stunning disservice to try to reduce the kind of ridiculous abstraction in the Bible down to just a sky daddy, right? That drives me nuts when people do that. Probably more than anything else, illustrates the mental laziness of the typical atheist position. And don't get me wrong, there's some atheists that are far more sophisticated than that. People like Alex O'Connor, for example. But man, the bulk atheist group that you'd have to deal with with the people I'd argue with and debate with online, all of them, they just think Christianity is nothing more than a superstition. They forget all of the other intricacies of the narratives. They forget all of the other abstractions, the like 18 levels of truth that are involved on top of like perhaps one slightly misconceived truth, right? So slightly misconceived materialistic truth. If you've got one thing that's a symbol, and on top of that symbol are built like 10 layers of truth, but somebody goes all the way through, they just skip right past all 10 layers and go to that one symbol and say, that's symbolic, not materialistic, like straight up real. Meaning that does that mean that the other 10 layers are false? No, of course not. And symbols are real in so much as they are symbols, right? Like, I don't understand how someone can go critique a circle for being circular, right? Even though we have no example of a real circle in reality. Never before has an actual circle appeared in reality. It's an abstraction. Shapes are an abstraction, just like numbers, right? And they're founded on axiomatic belief. Like numbers are founded on set theory. Shapes are founded on Euclidean axioms. And these abstractions are every bit as real as a golf ball or a bowl of cereal or these lights in my room or that wall. They're every bit as real. Probably, maybe more so, right? Like, as we've already discussed, all of these are just comprised of photons and atoms that are abstractions themselves. So why would that be a bad thing to have symbols upon which we can build these very, very complex and intricate narratives that are all giving us additional utility in our daily lives? Like, why would that ever be a bad thing? Right? But then we have to ask, is it real? Well, it's probably more real than all of the other stuff you see in life.
And the reason for that is if you don't tell the truth, or let's say if you lie, which is an easier way to think about it, you corrupt the mechanisms, the instinctual mechanisms that manifest themselves as meaning, and then you can't trust them. And that's a very bad idea. So the fundamental reason to not lie is because you corrupt your own perceptions if you lie. And when you corrupt your own perceptions, then you can't rely on yourself. And if you can't rely on yourself, then, well, good luck to you.
Right.
Because what are you going to rely on in the absence of your own judgment?
If you can't trust yourself, who can you rely on, right? One of the things he's talking about is like, if you're used to lying, right, or being deceptive, like one of the chief ways that people deceive is through words, right, through speech. And so if you're used to speaking falsehoods, then now one of the chief ways of you gaining information is likewise through communication, through conversation. Now, when they speak to you, you're always thinking, man, but I lie when I speak. What if they're lying to me when they speak? And then you've basically fundamentally eroded your confidence in one of the chief mechanisms for understanding the universe, one of the chief mechanisms for your judgment, right? Powerful, powerful, powerful. So there's the brilliance of Jordan Peterson, guys. I could keep going forever, basically. He's just next level. For anybody out there who doubts the wisdom and the knowledge of Jordan Peterson, I encourage you to have a conversation with him directly, right? Have him on one of your shows and watch him melt your face with knowledge. He's just so learned, so outstandingly intelligent, like so outrageously intelligent. His IQ is easily 140 plus, easily, safely in the top, 3 to 5% of the world. I don't understand how anybody could look at somebody like that just because he's conservative And not even that conservative. He's just conservative compared to like Canadians, which is like Canadians are they're way out to the left. So, being conservative compared to them really isn't saying much. It kind of puts you in the center. But yeah, just because he's conservative and he doesn't come to the same conclusions as you does not mean that he's an idiot, does not mean he's not smart, does not mean that he hasn't accomplished an outrageous body of work. So I don't know. I don't know how anybody can get that from watching Jordan Peterson talk, but catch me next time on Common Mansplaining.